The night was quiet, but the silence carried a strange weight. It felt like the kind of silence that holds a secret inside it, waiting for the right moment to speak. The story begins long before anyone knew there was a mystery at all, before anyone knew that something small and forgotten would one day return, with the power to reopen memories that were never fully healed. The year was 1994. The set of the movie Speed was alive with noise, lights, cables, crew members shouting directions, cameras rolling, and schedules running tight. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock were still at the beginning of the journey that would change their lives, but neither of them knew it yet. They were just two actors trying to do their job well, trying to stay focused, trying to survive the long days and longer nights. But on one particular day, something happened that no one paid attention to. Something so small that it seemed like nothing at all. It happened in the middle of a rushed scene change, during a moment when everyone was running from one location to another. Sandra had a small wooden keychain attached to her bag, a tiny sun carved by hand. It was old, worn, and simple. To others, it looked like nothing. To Sandra, it was everything. It was carved by her mother when Sandra got her first acting job. Her mother told her that the sun was a reminder that even on dark days, light still exists, and that courage is not loud, it is quiet but constant. That small keychain was the only thing Sandra kept with her on every set, every audition, every flight. It was the closest thing she had to home. But in the chaos of that moment, the keychain slipped off. Nobody saw it fall. Nobody heard it hit the ground. Nobody noticed it was gone. Not even Sandra. Not yet. The scene continued. The cameras moved and the world rushed forward, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something small, but not small at all. Later that night, when the set was almost empty, Keanu walked across the pavement where everyone had rushed earlier. He was tired, quiet, and thinking as he usually did after long days. And then he saw it. A tiny wooden shape, dusty from the ground, but still shining a little under the light of a street lamp. A sun. He picked it up. He turned it in his hand. He saw the small carving marks, and even before he asked, he knew it did not belong to him. Keanu went to one of the set coordinators and asked if something was reported lost. No one had said anything yet. He decided to keep it safe until someone asked. He did not know whose it was, but he had a feeling it meant something to someone. He placed it in his pocket, thinking he would return it the next day. But the next day came, and Sandra never mentioned it. She was busy, focused, smiling, doing interviews, learning lines, trying to stay present. She did not even realize it was missing until hours later, and when she did, she thought it had fallen somewhere she would never find again. She did not cry. She did not panic. She just breathed, stood still for a moment, and then kept moving. But inside, something hurt. She never told anyone. She did not want to look dramatic or fragile. She convinced herself it was just an object, but she knew that was a lie. Still, she let it go because she had no choice. Keanu waited for her to mention it. She never did. The days passed, the shooting continued, the movie moved forward, and the keychain stayed in Keanu's pocket. He thought about giving it back many times, but every time he saw Sandra already stressed, already carrying so many things inside that no one could see, he stayed silent. There was something respectful about the silence, something almost sacred. He did not feel right interrupting her life to return something she seemed to have quietly buried. So he made a decision he did not explain to anyone. He kept it safe, not as a possession, but as a responsibility. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, the film finished, and their lives changed forever. Speed became a hit. Sandra became a rising star. Keanu became a global name. Interviews, new projects, new cities, new scripts, new people. Life moved faster than they could hold on to anything. But Keanu held on to the keychain. He did not know why. He just felt like it wasn't time yet. He placed it inside a small fabric pouch inside his guitar case, the one thing he trusted to travel with him everywhere. He never forgot it. Every time he opened the case, he saw the pouch. Every time he saw the pouch, he remembered the sun. And every time he remembered the sun, He remembered Sandra, not as a movie star, not as a co-actor, but as a human being who carried silent strength behind her smile. Years passed. Then more years. Decades went by. They met sometimes, at events, interviews, reunions, but life always moved too fast. There was never the right moment, never the right silence, never the right doorway to return what was never his. But Keanu always believed in timing. He believed that some things don't return when you want them to. They return when they are meant to, and so the keychain stayed with him, untouched, unchanged, still holding the same story, until the night everything finally aligned. The night the story truly begins. It was at a private industry tribute event, many years later in a quiet backstage hallway where only a few people walked. There was no red carpet there, no cameras, no noise, just a soft hum of distant applause. Sandra was standing alone for a moment, breathing slowly, grounding herself the way she always did before stepping into a crowded room. Keanu approached her, not as a superstar, not as the world's beloved actor, but as a quiet man holding something that did not belong to him. He said her name softly, and she turned, smiling the same gentle smile she had in the 90s, but now deeper, wiser, touched by life. He reached into his jacket, and for the first time in 30 years, he held out the small wooden sun. Sandra did not react at first. She looked at it, confused, then frozen, then breathless. The world around her stopped moving, her eyes softened. A tear formed before she even knew she was crying, because in that tiny wooden sun, carved by her mother, was everything she thought she had lost, everything she had convinced herself she would never see again, everything she had worked so hard to live without. And Keanu did not give a speech. He did not explain anything. He just said one quiet sentence. I did not keep it. I only guarded it until you came back for it. And that was when her heart broke and healed at the same time. Her tears said everything. No one else in the world knew what happened in that moment, because it was not meant for the world. It was meant for two. People who understood that some kindness needs no witness. And that is where the story opens. Not with the keychain being returned, but with the mystery of why it stayed missing for so long, and why the right moment always takes time. The moment the wooden sun returned to her hand, Sandra felt something she had not felt in many years. It was not just memory. It was not just emotion. It was the quiet shock of something deeply personal being brought back to life after years of silence. Her fingers closed around it slowly, as if she was afraid it would disappear again if she blinked. Keanu watched her reaction without moving, without speaking, without trying to control the moment. He had waited decades for this, but not for gratitude, not for praise. He waited because he knew that sometimes the right act of kindness is the one that asks for nothing when it finally arrives. For the first time in a long time, Sandra could not find words. She forced air into her lungs, but her voice stayed inside her chest. She looked at him with wet eyes, searching for something, maybe an explanation, maybe the missing pieces of a forgotten story. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of unspoken things, full of shared years, full of questions that had waited too long to be asked. Finally, she found her voice, soft and almost breaking. How did you have this? Keanu did not answer immediately. He looked down for a moment, almost like he was not sure if the truth would sound ridiculous after so much time. Then he spoke with the same calm tone he had always carried, the kind that made even silence feel safe. I found it the night it fell. I thought you would ask for it the next day, but you never did. And every time I thought of giving it back, it felt like the moment was not right, so I kept it safe, not as mine. Just waiting. Sandra closed her eyes and breathed in sharply. It was not the object that broke her. It was the knowledge that someone had cared quietly for so long. Someone had remembered what she herself had forced herself to forget. Someone had protected something she had once believed was gone forever. She opened her eyes again, and the first real question came. Why did you wait so long? Keanu's answer was simple. Because you were not ready to receive it, and I was not ready to return it. Her heart sank and rose at the same time, because even though the answer was mysterious, it felt true. Life has a way of deciding timing more strongly than people do. She looked at the wooden sun again, running her thumb along the edge of the carving. She remembered her mother's voice, the smell of the old workshop, the night she received it, the pride in her mother's eyes. She remembered losing it, pretending it did not matter, telling herself she had moved on, but she never did. And Keanu knew that, not because she told him, but because he had watched her in silence back then. He noticed things most people never noticed. "He always had," Sandra finally whispered. "I thought it was gone forever. I told myself to stop thinking about it." Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes we let go of things because we think we have to, not because we are ready." That line settled inside her chest like truth she had waited years to hear. She felt the old pain return, but this time it did not stay. It passed through her, then dissolved into gratitude, like a wound finally allowed to heal. They stood there for a while without speaking. The backstage hallway was quiet, but the weight of the moment felt larger than the room they were standing in. It felt like the past and the present had finally met and recognized each other. Then the first twist of the story began to unfold, because while the return of the keychain felt like an ending, it was not the end. It was the beginning. Sandra finally managed to speak with more strength. "Where did you keep it all these years?" Keanu looked at the floor, then back at her. "Inside my guitar case, in the same pouch. It never left." That answer surprised her, but not because of the guitar case. It surprised her because of what it meant. He had carried it everywhere. Through movies, hotels, plane rides, sadness, happiness, fame, loneliness. It had stayed with him even when they were not speaking, not working, not even in the same country. He could have thrown it away. He could have forgotten. He did neither. Sandra felt a question forming inside her. One she was almost scared to ask. "Why did you care so much?" Keanu took a breath, long and thoughtful, as if he was trying to choose the right version of the truth. "Because I saw how you held it. I saw how you touched it before every take. I could tell it was not just an object. It was a story. And stories deserve to return home." That line hit her like a quiet storm. Stories deserve to return home. Not people. Not things. Stories. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small. They felt like a shallow cup trying to hold an ocean. Instead, she asked something else. "Did you ever think of giving it back earlier?" Keanu nodded, "Many times. But every time I saw you, you looked like someone who was already carrying too many losses. And I did not want to add another memory to the list. I wanted the right moment, not a random one." She looked at him, stunned, because she had never told him about the losses, but he had felt them. He had seen them in silence, the same way he always saw what others missed. It was then she realized something deeply unsettling but strangely comforting. He did not just return the keychain. He returned the version of Sandra that was still holding on to it, the young girl on her first movie, the daughter who still believed. Her mother was watching, the woman who once needed a small wooden sun to feel brave. And now, years later, she did not need the sun anymore, but she needed the closure. Keanu had been waiting for that exact moment, but before she could say anything more, something unexpected happened. A crew member walked in from another hallway, calling Sandra's name, reminding her she was about to receive an award, asking if she was ready. She wiped her eyes quickly, nodding, but inside her mind something had changed. Forever. She was not ready for the award. She was ready for something else. Truth. What? She did not know yet was that the keychain was not the only thing that had stayed with Keanu. There was more. More memory, more history, more connections. She had forgotten, but he never did. And as she walked toward the stage, still holding the sun tightly, one question planted itself like a seed in her mind. What else did he remember that she had forgotten? That is where the suspense begins, because the return of the keychain was not the whole story, it was just the door to the story. A story about time, memory, unfinished moments, unspoken respect, and the kind of kindness that does not ask for recognition. The kind of kindness that waits and the truth waiting behind that door was bigger than either of them expected. The applause from the stage was loud, but Sandra barely heard it. The world outside was moving. Cameras flashing, people smiling, speeches flowing. But inside her mind, a different world had opened. A world that had been locked for 30 years. A world she thought she had buried. But Keanu had just unlocked it without force, without pressure, without even touching a single emotion too loudly. She walked onto the stage with the wooden sun hidden in her palm. Her fingers pressed against it like she was holding a heartbeat. The audience saw a confident actress, polished and graceful, but they did not see the storm inside her chest. They saw the present version of Sandra Bullock, but Sandra herself was standing in two timelines at once, the woman she was now and the girl she was then. Her speech was short, respectful, and elegant, but her voice carried a tremor even she could not hide. No one understood why. No one knew what had just been returned to her life. No one saw the tear that escaped the moment she turned away from the microphone. But Keanu saw it. He had been watching from backstage, not as a star, not as a friend, but as someone who had waited years for this exact moment of release. He knew that sometimes closure does not come through explanation. It comes through quiet return. After the event, people surrounded Sandra, congratulating her, taking photos, shaking hands, talking about future films, memories, interviews, and headlines. She smiled politely, but her eyes were somewhere else. Half of her was in the room. The other half was holding a question that refused to disappear. Why? Did he wait 30 years to return it? She replayed, his words in her head. I only guarded it until you were ready, but... Ready for what? Ready to remember, ready to heal, ready to accept something she could not face back then, whatever the answer was. She knew one thing clearly. This was not random. This was intentional. And Keanu had always been intentional. He was never the man of grand gestures. He was the man of quiet truths. Truths that arrived slowly, like sunrise, not like breaking glass. She knew there was more behind the keychain, not because he hid something, but because he never spoke more than needed, which meant every unsaid word had meaning. When the crowd finally thinned, she saw Keanu standing alone, near the exit door, hands in his pockets as if he was waiting, but not expecting anything. She walked toward him, her heartbeat steady but heavy. When she reached him, she spoke before she lost courage. You kept something that was not yours for 3 decades. That is not nothing. That is a choice. But I do not understand all of it. Not yet? Keanu nodded slowly, his expression soft, almost reflective. You are not supposed to understand it all at once. Some things are meant to be understood over time, not in one night. She studied him, trying to read the lines on his face, the quiet depth in his expression. He had always carried stillness. In a world addicted to noise, then she asked, the question her heart had been circling around ever since he handed her the sun. Was there ever a moment you thought of? Returning it and decided not to. Keanu hesitated, for the first time, and that hesitation meant everything. He finally answered, yes. Many times. Sandra waited. There were days when you looked happy, and I did not want to remind you of something you had lost. There were days when you looked tired, and I did not want to give you something heavy to hold. And there were days when I wanted to say something, but silence felt kinder than words. Silence felt kinder than words. That sentence sank into her like a memory she did not know she needed. She had spent years thinking strength was shown by moving on, but Keanu had proved another kind of strength. The strength of holding something for someone else, not because you need it, but because one day they will. She took a slow breath. You waited all these years for the right moment. How did you know tonight was the moment? Keanu looked down, then back at her. Because tonight, you were being honored for surviving everything life gave you. And I thought the girl who once carried this sun finally deserved to meet the woman who no longer needs it. Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard. Her eyes glistened but did not fall into tears yet. She had been celebrated for awards, movies, success, and fame. But no one had ever honored her survival. No one had ever acknowledged that she had lived through pain quietly, carried grief silently, and built strength without applause. And now she realized something deep. Keanu did not return the keychain to remind her of her past. He returned it to show. Her, she had outgrown it, but the suspense was only growing, because something still did not align. Something bothered her. Something felt incomplete. If the story was as simple as he found it and kept it safe, why did his eyes carry that weight when he handed it back? What was he not saying? What was he protecting her from? She stared at him with quiet intensity, trying to read something behind his calmness. There is something else, isn't there? Keanu did not answer. He looked at her the same way someone looks at a wound they once knew existed but never opened. And then he said something strange. What you lost was not just the keychain. It was the moment it belonged to. Her breath stopped for a second. What? Did that mean what moment? What did she forget or, worse? What did she never know happened? A whisper of fear and curiosity mixed inside her. For the first time, she realized the mystery was not about the object. It was about the night it was lost. The keychain was only the surface. The truth was buried underneath. She stepped closer, eyes locked on him. Keanu, what are you not telling me? He looked at her the way someone looks at a door they know will hurt to open. Then he replied softly, when something disappears, it is not always an accident. Sometimes something else was happening in that same moment, something you were never told. Her heart went still. He continued, and before I return that truth, you need to decide if you are ready to know what really happened that night. The hallway suddenly felt colder. She could hear her own breathing. Ready or not, the past was walking toward her again, and this time she could not walk away. The suspense was no longer about the keychain. It was about the hidden truth buried behind it, truth that Keanu had guarded just as carefully as he guarded the wooden sun. A truth that was finally coming toward her, and the story had only just begun to open. The air around them felt different now. The moment shifted from emotional reunion to something deeper, something heavier, something that did not belong to the present, but to the night. The keychain was lost. Sandra felt a quiet tension building in her chest, not fear, but a kind of pressure that comes when the past is no longer willing to stay buried. She looked at Keanu closely, noticing the way his eyes softened and sharpened at the same time. He was not avoiding the truth. He was choosing the right time to release it, and that made it even more real. Tell me what happened that night, she said quietly. Keanu did not answer right away. Instead, he walked a few steps toward the empty side of the backstage hallway, where no one could hear them. Sandra followed. The dim light, the lonely air, the echo of applause still fading behind them. It all felt like the world knew this conversation was never meant for a crowd. Keanu finally spoke, slowly, as if every word carried weight. The night you lost the keychain was not just a normal shooting day. Something else happened. Something you never knew about. Sandra felt her heart beat harder. Memories from that time flickered in her mind like old film tape. Long hours, exhaustion, pressure, but nothing clearly wrong, nothing that stood out. What happened? She asked again, this time with more urgency. Keanu looked at her gently, but there was something protective in his expression, something careful. Before I tell you, you need to promise something. Sandra frowned slightly. Promise what? Promise that you will not blame yourself for anything you hear, because none of it was your fault. Those words made her pulse slow down for a second. There was something in his tone she had never heard from him before. Not calm, not quiet, protective. She nodded slowly. I promise. Keanu took a breath and began. That night, after you dropped the keychain, everyone rushed to reset the scene. You were called to the other side of the lot. But what you never saw was that someone almost got hurt behind the camera. One of the crew members slipped on a cable right where you had been standing. Sandra blinked, confused. I don't remember that. You wouldn't. Because you were already being moved. Everyone's attention was on you. They were trying to keep you focused. No one wanted you to panic. Sandra felt a strange stillness inside her. The keychain, the chaos, the rush, and now this, and the person who slipped. Was it serious? Keanu nodded slowly. It could have been. He almost hit the ground hard, but I caught him before he fell. Sandra stared at him. You were there, yes, I was right behind you when it happened. A quiet shock went through her. All those years, she had never known anything went wrong that night. No one told her. No one mentioned a fall. No warning. No report. Nothing. It was as if the moment had been erased from time. Why didn't anyone tell me? Keanu looked at her, with a kind of sadness that did not belong to regret, only truth, because they thought you already had too much to carry. The movie depended on you. You were under pressure. They didn't want to add one more thing, so they handled it quietly. Sandra's voice lowered, a whisper. And you stayed silent, Took? Keanu nodded. Yes, because the crew member asked me not to tell you. He did not want you to feel guilty. He knew how much the film meant to you. He said you already had enough weight on your shoulders. Sandra looked away for a moment, eyes watering again, not from sadness this time, but from a deep ache that came from learning the truth too late. So the keychain fell when that happened, yes, in the rush, in the noise, in the sudden shift. No one even saw it, not the cameras, not the crew, not you, only me. Hours later, when the set was empty, Sandra ran her hand down her face slowly. The entire night was unfolding in front of her like a story she had lived but never truly seen. And the man who slipped. Is he okay now? Keanu nodded again. Yes. He walked away fine. He worked on other films. He is alive. But that night, something changed for him too. Sandra looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Keanu took a pause. Not dramatic, but respectful. He told me something before he left the set that night. Something I've never forgotten. Sandra's voice softened. What did he say? Keanu looked directly into her eyes. He said there are two kinds of people in this world. Some lose things and move on like nothing happened. Others lose something and quietly lose a part of themselves with it. He said you were the second type. He said he could see it in the way you worked, the way you smiled, the way you carried your sadness without asking anyone to carry it with you. Sandra lowered her gaze. That description felt painfully accurate. She never shared her weight. She always carried it alone. Keanu continued. He said if that little sun ever found its way back to you, maybe that lost part of you would return too. A tear slipped down her cheek again, but she did not wipe it. She let it fall. You remembered all that? She whispered. Every word. Keanu replied, and now the truth was finally visible. Keanu did not just return a keychain. He returned a part of her that was frozen in time. A part she did not even know. She had lost. The suspense was not finished yet, because Sandra suddenly realized something else. You said that was not the only thing from that night. What else are you not saying? Keanu hesitated. The same hesitation that appeared in part 3. The hesitation of someone who knows the next truth will cut deeper than the last. Sandra waited. Silence stretched, but not empty silence, the kind that holds a door between two people. Waiting to be opened, Keanu finally spoke. There is one more thing you never knew, but before I tell you, I need to ask something first. Sandra nodded slowly, bracing herself. Ask. Keanu's voice dropped softer than before. If you had known the truth back then, about the accident, about the keychain, about the moment, do you think you would have continued the film the same way? Sandra froze. She had never thought about that. She never had the chance to, but the question unlocked. Something she was not prepared for. If she had known, someone was almost hurt because of her movement. If she had known her memory of that, night was incomplete. If she had known someone was protecting her from truth, would she have still pushed forward like nothing happened, or would she have broken down? She did not answer immediately. Her silence was her answer. Keanu saw it, and then he said something she did not expect. The truth was hidden to protect you, and I carried it because I believed one day you would be strong enough to carry it without breaking, Sandra whispered. And you think today is that day? Keanu nodded once. Yes, because you are not the girl who lost the sun anymore. You are the woman who can hold the truth without falling apart. Sandra's breath trembled. The suspense was no longer about the past. It was about who she had become. She stared at him and spoke in a voice that felt like strength and fear. Holding hands, tell me the rest. I am ready. Keanu looked at her with calm certainty. Then tomorrow we meet. Not here, somewhere quiet, somewhere with time. Because the final part of the story cannot be told in a hallway. It deserves space, and so do you, and just like that. The next chapter was no longer about returning something. It was about revealing something. The story was no longer only about loss. It was about what had been hidden in the silence that followed, and the silence was finally ending. The next morning was quiet, but not in an ordinary way. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a truth finally steps out of the shadows. Sandra arrived at the small cafe Keanu had chosen. Not a Hollywood place, not a luxury space, just a simple corner cafe with warm light, old wooden tables, and no one asking for autographs. A place where conversations could breathe. Keanu was already there, sitting near the window, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. When Sandra walked in, he looked up with the same calm expression he had worn the night before. But there was something new in his eyes, something heavier, something final. She sat across from him, the wooden sun still in her hand. "So this is the place where you tell me the rest," she said softly. Keanu nodded. "Yes. Because what I am about to say is not a story from the film set. It is a story about you, and you deserve to hear it in a place where no one is watching." Sandra braced herself. "Tell me." Keanu leaned back slowly, gathering his thoughts, not rushing, not dramatic, just honest. "The night you lost the keychain. The accident was not the only reason I kept it. There was something else I noticed, something no one else saw." Sandra waited, eyes steady. "You were breaking that night, not because of the film, not because of the pressure, but because you had just gotten news about your mother's health." Sandra's breath stopped. That moment came back to her like a wave. She remembered the phone call. She remembered pretending she was fine. She remembered hiding it so the production would not get delayed. "How did you know that?" she whispered. Keanu replied quietly, "Because I heard you crying behind one of the trailers. You thought no one was there. You wiped your tears before you stepped back into the scene. You held the keychain right after that, like it was the only thing keeping you together." Sandra looked down, her eyes filling, but not with weakness, with recognition. She had forgotten how fragile she was back then. She had forgotten how hard she worked to look unbreakable. Keanu continued. "When I found the keychain later that night, I realized it was not just something you liked. It was something you used to survive. And I knew you were not ready to lose it. But I also knew you were not ready to face what it meant if I gave it back too soon." Sandra whispered. "So you kept it because returning it would have opened the wound." Keanu nodded. "Yes. You needed time. Time to grow. Time to heal. Time to become someone who no longer needed an object to stay strong." She stared at him, emotions filling every part of her voice. "And when did you know that time had finally come?" Keanu's answer was simple. "When I saw you walk on stage last night. Not as someone pretending to be strong, but as someone who had truly become strong. That is when I knew the sun no longer belonged in my hands. It belonged back in yours." Sandra looked at the keychain again, but this time it did not feel like a missing piece. It felt like a completed one. "So all these years, you were not just keeping an object. You were keeping a memory safe until I was strong enough to face it." Keanu nodded once. "Yes, and now you are." The silence that followed did not hurt. It healed. Sandra finally exhaled, long and steady. "Thank you for carrying something I didn't even know I needed carried." Keanu smiled. Not proudly, not dramatically, just peacefully. "You were never alone, even when you thought you were. Some kindness does not announce itself. It just waits." Sandra wiped a tear. But this time it was not from pain. It was from peace. The suspense was no longer about what happened. It was now about what it meant. She looked at him one last time. "Is there anything else I should know?" Keanu shook his head. "No, the story is complete. Not because the past changed, but because you did, and she understood. The real return was not the keychain. The real return was herself." The days that followed did not feel dramatic or heavy. Instead, They felt calm, like a door that had been closed for years was finally opened, and the room behind it was filled with light instead of dust. Sandra carried the wooden sun again, but not the way she once did. It was no longer a shield. It was no longer a reminder of fear or pain. It was now a symbol of how far she had traveled within herself. She kept it in her pocket for a few days, not because she needed it, but because she wanted to understand it again, like meeting an old friend who once held her hand through storms. Keanu never asked her how she felt about it. He never followed up with emotional questions. He never tried to take credit for anything. That was his nature. He did not do things to be seen. He did not return the keychain for gratitude. He did it because it was the right thing, even if no one else ever knew. A week later, Sandra invited him to a quiet garden behind a small art museum. No cameras, no assistants, no reporters, no spotlight, just two people sitting on a bench, letting the silence feel like company instead of emptiness. She handed him a small folded paper, not a letter, not a note, just a quote she had written. Sometimes the people who hold our broken pieces never tell us they were keeping them safe. Keanu read it, then looked at her, and the two of them shared the kind of smile that does not need sound. Sandra spoke first. All these years, I thought I had lost something. Now I know it was waiting for me, and I'm not talking about the keychain. Keanu nodded. I know, she laughed softly. You always know, don't you? Keanu shrugged lightly. Not always, but I try to pay attention. People who stay quiet often notice the most. They sat there for a long time, not talking about movies, not talking about fame, not talking about the past. They talked like two people who respected the journey each other had walked. The unseen one, not the public one. As they stood up to leave, Sandra held the wooden sun in her hand one last time, then spoke. I'm not going to keep this with me anymore. Not in my pocket. Not in my bag. I think it has completed its work. Keanu nodded gently. Then where will it go? Her eyes softened. Somewhere it can remind someone else, not of what they lost, but of what they can still become. And that was when Keanu understood fully. Sandra was not returning the past. She was releasing it. Before they walked away, she looked at him and said something she had never said before. You didn't just return something to me. You returned a version of me that I forgot existed. And that is not kindness. That is grace. Keanu lowered his head slightly, the way he always did when words felt larger than acknowledgement. I just held what was never mine until it found its way home. And there it was. The final truth. The story was never about an object. It was about the kind of people who protect what others lose. Not to own it. Not to use it, but to return it when the time is right. As they walked in different directions, neither of them looked back. They did not need to because nothing was missing anymore. The past remained where it belonged. The present felt lighter, and the future carried. No weight from yesterday, the wooden sun would one day rest in a quiet place. Maybe a shelf, maybe a small box, maybe a museum of memories, not as a symbol of loss, but as proof that real kindness does not rush, does not demand, and does not disappear. It waits. It protects. And when the moment arrives, it returns, not for applause, but for closure. Because some people do not just enter our lives, they guard the parts of us we are not ready to hold. And one day, when we finally can, they place them back into our hands with respect, and our tears say everything.